welcome to Varn Blog. I am here with Steve Grumbine, founder of The Real Progressives, host over at Macro and Cheese, and The Rose Scholar. And today is an interesting day. These don't come out when I record them, so I'm just going to timestamp this because this will probably be about a month in the future, and maybe we'll know how bad this all turns out. It came out today that the Democrats are kind of pushed up against the wall on adding work requirements to food aid, which in and of itself would not actually be that particular big of a deal if it wasn't also looking like we're about to enter a period of relatively high unemployment that seems to have been deliberately engineered by the Federal Reserve Bank. So then that relatively innocuous work requirement is going to seem a lot more onerous at a time point when student loans kick back in, most of the COVID programs are gone away, and the recession that we've seemingly stalled off because of political emergencies due to COVID hits. I have wondered why the modern monetary theorist policy world has kind of been quiet on this to some degree. It is not that they are not fighting it. They are, but there's no unity about how to approach the Democratic Party on these matters. And I think the Dems really kind of are between a rock and a hard place for reasons that are, if we're honest, their fault. But it's going to be hard to deal with now. And I'll finish, my setup. This is a very long setup, and then I'll let you respond. But it seems like because of the failure to really deal with the Supreme Court, thus making something like, mint the coin that Roe and Gray says, which may be legal under the 14th Amendment, but since the courts, Biden has not done anything to lessen the court's power to stop him in doing these kinds of executive orders. It looks like that they're not really taking that on as a possibility because they don't want to lose in the courts and have a showdown. Secondly, the Democrats didn't do anything about the debt ceiling in the first place. And in fact, one of the weirdest things I remember in the last 2 years is they didn't even discuss getting rid of it in any of their reforms act. Do you remember them discussing getting rid of the debt ceiling in any of their reforms?
No, not one time. Not at all. Zero.
Yeah.
No.
And to me, that's like a poison pill we know exists. We know has been used on us many, many times. We're not going to touch it when we have Congress and could theoretically get that. But I guess they didn't want to look embarrassed because they wouldn't discipline Joe Manchin or Kristen Sinema. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, you're presuming that their end goal is in fact to fix this, and in their mind, they actually really see it as a problem. The reality is that this has been going on since World War I. When it was happening in World War I, it was really intended to ensure that we made our payments on bills, that there wasn't delays and things like that. So they put this thing in there at that point in time to ensure that we were constantly making sure we could ratchet up for the war effort. However, over the course of time, this has taken on a much more political and it's become a tool, a wedge, okay? And when the Republicans are in power, they don't want to see the Democrats using it against them and vice versa, both ways. But it's typically a Republican stronghold to stand on these kinds of things and try to hijack the agenda. But I really do ask you the question, if you understand from an MMT perspective, because that's why you're talking to me, if you understand that, you understand the imposition of a tax is the coercive force that gives the currency its power. And if you think about this, each step along the way, each of these type of devices are used as a coercive force. And they're used as a way of getting what they want. I don't believe in my heart of hearts that the Democrats really want to get rid of this at all. In fact, if you go back to the beginning of the Biden administration, coming fresh off of Trump, he could have stacked the courts. He could have undid just about everything that Trump had done during his time in there without any effort at all, had he just made a decision to do it. But he instead overtly made a decision not to do it. That to set the stage not only for these kind of debt limit crisis, but also the repeal of Roe v. Wade and many other things. And you say to yourself, is that just a self-inflicted wound? Is the guy just a moron? I mean, he's been in power for 50 years. He's been doing austerity-based politics and very much a boll weevil style politics since, he first took office. So this is nothing new if you followed the career of Joe Biden. But it does put people on the firing line, literally right there in the spotlight, when you ask, well, why didn't you take extra effort to either A, push for minting the coin, which had no air cover whatsoever? The 14th Amendment, you would think that the Constitution holds far more weight with the Supreme Court, or with anyone else for that matter, over some random law that was passed over 100 years ago. Okay. So to me, once again, this is the parliamentarian jumping out of the shadows, blocking another, obvious common sense law. And you keep asking yourself, why does this keep happening? And I genuinely believe in the end of all ends that their job is to protect capital. We have superimposed on these guys the idea that they're somehow or another supposed to be the champions for the working class, the champions for labor. Democrats haven't been the champions for labor in forever. I mean, we're talking about 1950s. I mean, we're before that. So
and we've talked about this off air, that I think even when they were the champions for labor, they were so reluctantly.
Absolutely. You cannot look at these guys with a sober eye and really fall down and come to the conclusion that they're just so feckless and weak that they just can't overcome the power of the right wing, and they're just so overmatched and blah, blah, blah. I believe it is intentional. And when you think about this, they each use each other for cover. And so as a lefty watching the Democrats preen about the debt limit and stuff, none of this stuff has to happen. Joe Biden has made decisions repeatedly over and over through this process to place easy anthills in front of him that trip him up. And so to me, I don't believe this is an error. I don't believe this is a mistake. I believe that this is intentional, because the answers are right there. I mean, something as simple as eliminating student debt. The Debt Collective had literally done the legal eagle research, had literally put together an executive order that was perfectly legal, that Biden could have used and stood on to eradicate it all. Instead, he just took a little nibble, and it made him look like he was a warrior. All of a sudden, now that's on the table to not only stop, but to put back on the burden, the little teeny burden that was removed, to put it back on the backs of the people that received the slightest help. So again, I don't see an honest effort. I see we have to ask ourselves the motive why. And when you serve capital, you need your labor force, you need your citizenry pliable and in precarity. And if you listen closely, they say it. They've said it at the Federal Reserve Board meetings, they've said it in Congress, they've said it in hot mics. This is stuff that is just a known. The point of this is to keep the working class in a position where it does what capital wants them to do. And here we are.
Right. I mean, and unfortunately, what is taking the working class to even be in this position is basically, if we are quite honest, mass excess death. Because this has been so successful for the past 30 years and it's been a bipartisan thing. And I think you cannot deal with that. I know a lot of progressives who are institutionalists, and my challenge to them has been increasingly, okay, you said that Biden did this compromise student loan effort. Which, by the way, I'm actually like I was actually critical of the entire time because it doesn't fix it permanently either. It is a one-time relief. Yep. It's not even like a proper jubilee. It's
crap.
It's a bad deal for a lot of people. But the other thing is, it seemed to me clearly implemented in a way that gave it time to be stopped. And what do I mean by that? Well, we can pull, like, I know some of this is Federal Reserve, but they also got congressional backing for this to pull tons of money out of the air, which is, of course, how you make currency, is pull it out of the air for stabilizing mid-range banks. No questions asked, no political deliberations. It was done with the help of Congress bipartisanly very quickly. Now, I realize you're not going to get bipartisan effort on student debt relief. And if the Republicans have their way, even current forms of relief like public service loan forgiveness and whatnot will be gone. Or, the income adjusted repayment forgiveness after 20 years, which still comes with a potentially massive tax burden. None of that's on air. And there's also been no talking about like common sense reforms. And by that, I mean, just let people declare bankruptcy on it.
Like, bankruptcy's screwed now too.
Yeah, I know. It's beginning worse and worse. Like, so you have these compromises that seem to be set up to fail. And I pointed out to people that the 2022 elections were going to teach Democrats the wrong thing. And what do I mean by that? I was like, well, they have no incentive to fix Roe v. Wade. It's because now they have the exact same cudgel that the Republicans had over their pro-life base the entire time, which is if it's federalized, then we can motivate people to come out on the state level about it, but never actually do anything, right? And in some ways, the Supreme Court's decision, it's bad for women, but it's ideal for both parties because it keeps this as a motivator in particular areas where the other side is strong. And so I'm like, yeah, they have no political reason to do anything about that. and they've had a chance to multiple times. You could, we couldn't have done it in Biden. Yeah, but they could have done it when they had a supermajority under Obama. It was talked about at the time. They knew it was up. They didn't want to do it. Don't lie to yourselves, people. Like, similarly, they knew the debt ceiling was a threat. It had been a threat in the 80s. They didn't want to get rid of it. No. Like, you constantly feel like they're imposing their own handicaps on purpose, and progressives eat it up. Oh, it's the auditor. Well, the Republicans, when they had a problem with the auditor, they fired them. Like, which, yes, is Democratic is shenanigans, but that is why the Republicans seem to get their agenda done, while Democrats somehow always seem to just stumble on every single block that they seem to put down themselves.
Hey, Derick, let me ask you a question. When you look at this stuff, and you've been doing this a long time, okay? I do political talk show on Status Quo with Jordan Chariton. And over there, they frequently talk about the political landscape, and it seems like wash, rinse, repeat every day, just about. And there's been shows that we've done 6 months apart that could have been the same show 6 months prior, sometimes a year apart, the same exact show, saying almost exactly the same things. And for some, they never quite clue into this, that it's the wash, rinse, repeat cycle, because you're asking someone that is intentionally not solving your problem. You're actually accepting their lie that the Republicans did it. Well, then it was Cinnamon Mansion, and then it was the Parliamentarian, and it's a rotating villain. Once it was Cory Booker, and then it's Nancy Pelosi and their Green Dream or whatever. There's always someone there strategically out of the blue, right at the 11th hour, that blocks it. In fact, in the case of the public option, even with Medicare for all and things like that, Obama, without any force, before it even became a debate, said, yeah, I'm going to take that off the table, and took the public option off the table. These are not, they're self-inflicted if you believe in the goodness of the Democrats. If you think the Democrats are there to serve you, you're like, wow, how could they have done this? What a mistake. What are they thinking, right? And if you're still holding on to that kind of childlike, almost like doe-eyed belief that they're there to serve you, then this will always be this puzzling thing that happens repeatedly, like Lucy yanking the football away. But if you get to a point where your cynicism matches the facts, it's really cynicism anymore. Isn't it just more like being an archaeologist reviewing what's happening before you, watching the frozen caveman and its primal state and seeing what it does? I mean, what we're watching here is a pattern. It's a pattern that should tell you that their interests are in fact not to serve the American people. It is, I genuinely, beyond the shadow of a doubt, believe, as our friend Clara Mattei says, that they serve the Capitol order. And this is not some conspiracy drivel. This is evidenced by their behavior, evidenced by them. Like, you see the meme where the guy's riding the bicycle and he goes, well, if only this would happen. And then he shoves a stick into the wheel and says, oh, the Republicans did it. This is, I don't know how people can fall for it anymore. And it makes it very hard to take these things seriously, because, ultimately, if in fact they are really being serious, we're really screwed. We're screwed worse than we would be if we just acknowledged that they're not really here to serve us. They're here to serve their donors. And I think that that's more of a fact-based assessment, at least from my vantage point.
To my argument is going to be pretty much similar, with the caveat that it doesn't actually matter if they mean it or not. But I think people should really think about what they're saying when they're like, oh, well, this is just because what I get. I went on a rant today in public. I've given to doing that, although I've gotten better over the years. And the progressive response to me was interesting, because it was basically, well, your criticism, and we know from our pragmatic blah, blah, blah winning that if we do this, we can get people in places like Chicago or the Squad to do X. And I'm like, I want to put this to you in terms of game theory. You're also telling me, however, we should never risk a Democratic loss, ever. Now, I want you to understand that if I take you sincerely, here's what you're saying: that we should always empower the Joe Manchins and Kristen Sinemas of the world knowingly, because they can defect, but you can't. You have no place else to defect. And you want us all to make sure we're in this party that we have no trading capacity for, just from electoral strategy. I'm not an electoralist either, but I've been trying to make this point literally for 6 years. Just look at what you're asking us to do. You are asking us to enter a party where we literally don't bring anything, but if we ask for too much or a liability, you're telling us to build like municipal socialism, but a lot of these people are nominally MMTers. And that to me is insane. Why is it insane? Because if you believe that currency sovereignty makes a lot of this possible, why in the blue fuck would you tell me that we're going to implement things like Medicare for all on a city or state basis, where you really do have to tax to pay for these things because you don't have currency sovereignty?
Yeah, I don't believe that any real actual MMTers are pushing for state by state Medicare. These are, people that are misinformed, They haven't done the homework, and the homework that they did do was self-reinforcing. They went to sources that would tell them what they wanted to hear.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as MMT goes, and I want to be clear, MMT simply says that the currency in the state, in the case of the United States, the US dollar, is a simple public monopoly. And right now, we have witnessed the power of capital making decisions on the use and what we spend on, using that dollar. The creation of currency comes from an act of Congress writing a law. It doesn't just happen out of thin air. I mean, it is thin air in the sense that it's from nothing and it's become something, but it's not from thin air in the sense that the power of law actually creates a series of instructions that then in turn could be fulfilled by the Treasury. But the way we operate today, we use a central bank, and those instructions are handed to the central bank, who then in turn makes deposits into the Treasury's general account, which spending occurs. It's a lot of jargon, but the truth of the matter is that really does matter. That little teeny step by step through the process really matters, because if you think that money is just printed out of just printed, we're just printing money, you might be tempted, as many of our leftist friends are, to think that they're going to debase a baseless currency, a free floating, meaning that it's not pegged to a commodity or anything like that, currency. And unfortunately, I hear a lot of good friends that should be allies, that tend to fight with you instead, trying to talk about, oh, if they're printing money, it's going to debase the currency. And that is so entrenched in thinking that the proles do it to themselves. You don't even require the big dogs of the state to crack down on them. They're too busy down here saying, oh, it's going to debase the currency, will cause inflation. And they literally lose their minds. So this is super important what you're saying, and where you're headed here, because folks try to make quote unquote MMT say things that it doesn't say. And they try and word it in ways that they think make sense, but isn't what MMT says either. And MMT is a view, it's a lens of how the system itself works. Yes, there are some prescriptive solutions that I would say are MMT informed. And I would say that there's literally one policy, and I wouldn't even necessarily call it a policy, I would call it the last piece of the puzzle in the federal job guarantee, which is something that allows, since the state creates unemployment by issuing the tax, because you got to do something to get the money, they say, hey, let's have the solution come from the state that created the problem and create a guaranteed public option for work that provides a base level, not only benefits package, but a base level in terms of compensation overall. So this provides that circuit, if you will. It completes the circuit, right? So that's literally the only policy prescription, you could say, that MMT throws out there. The rest of it is merely looking at the conditions of what's happening. And so go ahead.
I would say, however, this is not to disagree with anything that you're saying. My issue with MMT-ers, not MMT the theory,
sure,
is two things. One is most of them have a class collaborationist view of how money works, so that they really can't seem to understand why the capitalists and politicians adjacent to them, and even people in managerial positions and in fairly elite positions who might be wage earners and thus nominally workers, why they don't do this. All right. And at a certain point, I do think that is also willful blindness, because it's clear to me why they don't do this. Because if you actually the jobs guarantee prescription is also the most radical, is the most radical thing that would happen, in so much that it would actually mean that workers refusing to work would be a real threat to capitalism. They would have to make serious concessions, which would probably over the long term in their ability to be capitalists. So that's my first critique of MMTers. This is not a critique of the theory. The second critique is and this is also not a critique of the theory, but there's a little bit of hedging your bets about what taxation is for. Taxation exists. It closes the currency circuit. Like, why do we care about state credit? Because we have to pay stuff to the state. Why is that? Well, ultimately, it really comes down to them having guns. But beyond that, it is productive. It is credit as well as debt. And why would you want to call the debt in? All right. Well, MMTers admit inflation can happen from from monetary supply, although it's rare. Like every MMTer I know is like, oh, that's never actually what generally happens. It can happen, but we have a very simple fix, and this fix we actually got from Keynes. We tax it away, right? That's the other reason to tax. This is pretty clearly in Christine Dawson. It's like the other reason why you tax is that closes currency subject. And if you actually do get things more overheated than your production capacity allows, you do need to eat some of that currency back, and you will. What I find interesting right now, however, is like there's a whole lot of like, we don't really have to tax the rich to do stuff. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. We don't have to tax the rich to do stuff. But you know why we tax the rich? Because otherwise they accumulate too much goddamn power.
Like, they're too damn rich. Right.
Like, because what the currency is representing in this sense is like debt and credit, which is a power relationship. All right. Now, there are other complications about this, and there are other kinds of money. MMT deals with state currency. It deals with fiat currency. It deals with state theory of money. There are other forms of money. They happen in certain conditions, but honestly, most of them are still dominant because of some debt and credit relationship that makes them viable. That's why gold was used. It was actually a way to pay tithes, like going way back. And I think that's a legitimate issue. What is maddening about progressives who kind of flirt with MMT but then freak out because they're like, oh no, inflation's going up. Well, I'm like, okay, but why is that? Like, why is inflation going up? We had a bottleneck. We had asset inflation that was part of federal policy because we were willing to do that kind of, quote, MMT. It's not MMT. It's also not. I mean, MMT is a descriptive thing here. The government wanted to keep the markets floating, and make sure the stock market didn't fall. So you create a bunch of assets for that through quantitative easing. That didn't have to be targeted just at.
That's not MMT, by the way.
Yeah,
just
I know.
So you know.
I know.
We would hate that. We're not fans of QE.
No, I know that. Well, I mean, I'll get back into the debates about QE, but I know that most MMTers aren't. That causes asset inflation. All right. And there's a couple ways you can handle it. One is tax it back. Two is actually cut off the QE because you don't have the productive, like there's no productive capacity or actual wealth tied to that wealth. It's not really wealth. And this is where I'm like, you do need to supplement modern monetary theory with other things. Otherwise, you can use it for all kinds of shenanigans. And by use it, I don't mean actually do policy informed by MMT, is that you can throw this out there to get people to think you're doing stuff you aren't doing. Like, oh, we don't have to control the rich to have social democracy. Yeah, you do, but not for the reason you think. It's not because we need their money, right? Their money is not the issue. Their productive capacity and power is the issue.
Yeah. So we're on the same page here. Let me jump in because you've said a lot of things and I don't want them to get lost. They're points that need to be addressed. First things first, I want to tackle the big one in the room, and that is not taxing the rich kind of thing. This is frequently brought up because what MMT is actually saying, what MMTers, the development team, in fact, are actually saying there is that the role of taxation is not a funding operation first and foremost.
Absolutely.
So if we start there, Your hard-earned tax dollars never paid for any abortions or any bombs in Israel or Syria or any other thing that makes you get the ickies. None of your tax dollars did it, because your tax dollars are literally deleted. They're gone. They don't exist anymore. They literally serve to purge reserves in the system, and they're gone. They're never respent. The velocity of a government spent dollar is one. It's spent one time by the government, and that's it. It's never spent again. And it's created when it's spent. That's when money is created, when it's spent into existence. Okay. So when you understand that, all right, if I've got somebody sitting here in the desert and they are going to die if I don't give them a glass of water. However, the jerk that drugged them out to the desert to begin with is in a car 50 feet that way. If I have a choice, I can either A, drink the water and live, or B, I can shoot the guy that drugged me out to the desert and not make it to the water and die as well. So what MMTers are saying is, listen, let's go ahead and get people health care. Let's go ahead and get people their college burdens removed from them. Let's go ahead and ensure basic needs are met, a universal basic needs as opposed to a universal basic income. Let's ensure everybody has those things that could be inflated by the capitalist class. Let's guarantee the service so the inflation doesn't hurt them. So we're not talking about not taxing the rich. We're simply saying decouple the act of taxing for the act of spending. So in the case of spending on the people, let's spend on the people. Then we want to have a tax debate, because since taxes aren't tied to programs, they're not tied to spending, okay? We need to figure out, what do we want? What kind of society do we want? Do we want the wealthy accumulating billions of dollars? If not, why not put 100% tax on anything over whatever limit society decides is the right thing? But that is not, do not hijack my health care because you've got a fetish for taxing the rich. You're as complicit as in my death as the rich are if you force feed that paradigm through the door. So I call that a murderer by proxy, because people don't realize it, but that doesn't change the fact that someone died for your fetish to chase after the rich. Fight the rich. We have a real class war on our hands. Don't be a class traitor and make someone at the bottom suffer without health care because you decide it's more important to fight a tax war with the rich. Two separate battles, not one, two. Let's get health care, then let's go after and eat the rich. Eat them every bite, put a braised polenta on, whatever. Do the rich eating, but do that after you've give us health care. And frequently the line is that we can't handle Robin Hood politics while the earth burns. Let's do what we have to do while simultaneously taking down the bad guy. We're saying decouple them. That's all that's being said. It's not saying don't do it. It's saying don't hijack my health care because you've got a fetish that you've got to go after the rich. I get it. It's religion, but let's separate the two. There's no point. You're not getting the rich to pay for health care, because whatever you tax, whatever you think you're funding something with, you legitimize, and that means you need them forever. So if you want to pay for spending by a Wall Street speculation tax, that means you need Wall Street speculation to continue ad nauseum forever, because otherwise your program won't be funded anymore. If you're deciding to fund it on the backs of the rich, that means you need the rich to fund your program. Don't be a moron. Don't tie the two together. And that's what we keep trying to say. That's the goal here, right? Is to decouple, to mentally decouple that the government, when it spends, the relationship with spending has nothing to do with the point of the tax. Now let's get on the tax side. Interestingly, you said a few things that I think are really worth pointing out. When we talk about spending money into the economy or printing money or any of the other things that are said, we have two things. We have a stock and we have a flow. There's something called stock flow consistent modeling or sectoral balances. Very, very empirical, true, like a scientific truth. Like there's a lot of things in economics that are foolhardy. This ain't one of them. This is one of the very few tried and true accounting identities that is absolutely airtight. Okay. So once you understand stocks and flows, a stock is just a stack of money. A stack of money doesn't create inflation. It's a flow that does, right? And so if the government decides to pay, let's say I buy a pair of Levi's jeans today at $50 a pair. God, imagine that. $50 or $100, whatever the heck they charge for a pair of Levi jeans. The government says, hey, we want to buy 1 million pairs of Levi jeans for the government workforce. We're willing to pay $110 per pair. The government has now created, as the de facto price setter, the monopoly currency issue. It has set the price now at 110. And then it's going to get marked up through the retail world, as our capitalist society does. That's one form of inflation, the government choosing to pay higher prices. Another one that's very important is the bottlenecks. So if you have supply chain issues, it is possible that a company will say, hey, the cost of storing these goods at the port for an extra 3 weeks raises the price of everything. So we're going to put an extra 10% on top of this. That's possible. It's not, doesn't have to be that way. Instead, the business could eat some of the loss there instead of passing it on to consumers. But it never does that because it's got a responsibility to its shareholders to maximize profits and maximize shareholder return. So what does it do? It drives it up. Whether or not there is a really bottleneck impacting them is another story, though, because we have this excuseflation, we'll call it, right? Where the Fed and the Congress signal to industry, hey, we're going to spend a lot of money. This might be inflationary. So what do? Businesses say, I hear you, boss, right on it. They know that's a signal. They got that signal. When the Fed telegraphs, we're going to raise interest rates up, all of a sudden, some of the good boys of the network, like all the tech companies, say, hey, we hear you loud and clear, 10,000 layoffs on tap. You got it, brother. And so they will go ahead and start laying people off. But again, each of these things are predicated on this concept of inflation and inflation control. Honest to God, it has nothing to do with government printing money or space. It's not the quantity of money that impacts any of this. It's where it's spent and where it flows. And so if you look at, let's say I print, I hate that word, but let's say I print $1 trillion and I give it to one guy. That one guy has $1 trillion. It did not create inflation. He may buy a thing or two, or he might be a monopolist and buy up everything and raise the prices. That may be what he does. But that in and of itself doesn't create inflation. What might create inflation, however, is taking that same $1 trillion and giving it to everyone. And now everyone has pent-up demand inside them that they need. They got to get their teeth fixed. They got to get their electric bill paid. They got to get their car fixed, whatever. And now all of a sudden, all these people that previously had aggregate demand in waiting, latent aggregate demand, just waiting to be unleashed onto the economy, and no production to back that up, or not enough production to back that up. Now you've got a situation where you've got a supply issue. Now all of a sudden you've got demand pull inflation. If there's times where it's cost push, where you might have something where petroleum, which is a universal product that goes in plastics, it goes in glass, it goes in lubricants, goes in every cooking spot, everything. I mean, everything has got this stuff in it. Okay, if that goes up $2, now all of a sudden you've got something, a commodity that can raise prices up. But if you listen to scholars like Isabella Weber, her experience and her research shows that the vast majority of this inflation isn't really inflation at all. It's gouging. It's literal gouging, excuseflation, where they got the signals, all these institutionalized signals. They said, we hear you loud and clear. Sat in a dark, smoky room, so we're going to go for a 2.5% profit margin desire to a 5% profit margin. And all of a sudden they made these choices, and you can see the bottom line, the balance sheets of these corporations, and the huge 900 to 1,000% profit. Insane during a pandemic. How is that even possible? It's only possible because in our society, this neoliberal world we're living in, there is a decided choice by people like Joe Biden to not really meaningfully regulate industry, to not regulate business, to allow the free hand have its way. And so this is just the course of doing business. So what do? Instead of disciplining the markets, they discipline labor with layoffs, mass layoffs. And that's where the partnership and part of Clara Mattei's trinity of austerity kicks in with the interest rate hikes. Now, interest rates going up hasn't stopped people from buying things, but it is a signal. It is a signal to industry that we're trying to get you to lay people off. And so your point of we're going to hit mass layoffs, that's very real, but it's not something that has to happen because of interest rate hikes. Interest rate hikes would have to go so far through the roof, so far through the roof that it would literally collapse the economy. Instead, the unknown thing here about interest rate hikes is it actually creates inflation, because what are you doing? This is all brand new money. When they decide to sell these treasuries, they know how much interest and they budget that, and that money is ready for them. It's not something that just happens out of the blue. They know how much interest those things are. They're time boxed. They know what they're selling them for, and they know how much it's going to yield at the end. So what do? They go ahead and they sell these bonds to people, and that interest income channel, even with the government not spending anything, is spending huge sums, I mean trillions of dollars into the economy based on interest rate hikes. That's brand new money being spent all the way at the top of basic income for rich people. So interestingly enough, I think that the idea of stocks and flows is not understood. If I print $10 trillion and just have it sitting on my desk, tell me how that's inflationary. You can't. It's not doing anything. It's like a rock sitting there, a pet rock with some googly eyes on it. It doesn't do anything. It's only once you start spending it. And if there is a way for those things to be put on back order, like for example, Christmas morning, when you want to buy your Xbox and you're standing out at Best Buy at 3 o'clock in the morning, waiting to get the lottery ticket to buy 2 of them for your kids or whatever. And you're sitting there and wait. And they purposely only manufacture this many. They purposely do that because there's a prestige in the 4 P's of marketing, which part of this is positioning, part of it is price. And that price component right there is a big deal to exclusivity. That's intentional. So anyway, I hope that answers some of the questions. There was a lot more there, but
there's a lot there, and there's actually that clarifies where we agree, but also places where we might not. Okay. One of the things that Marxists are more seemingly more obsessed with than most MMTers, there are exceptions, Patel Kahoob's one of them, is the fact that we do not view the overall economic system as a closed system within a nation state. That money is a closed system within a nation state, but economics is not. And so how that complicates what you said is actually not clear to me. But for example, I am on record as disagreeing with Warren Mosler about government price regimes where they accept prices of other things, because I also think, well, governments are in competition with each other for prices. They are. Because they don't just buy stuff internally, they also buy stuff externally. Now, larger states like the United States, China, the EU, etc., really do have a whole lot of power over this, because there's not much. They do need things from outside, but there's not a lot they need. They need oil, although the United States doesn't really need oil, at least not right now. People might be, what? I'm like, we're oil independent now. Ironically, we could be energy independent at current right now. What drives our oil prices is our competition for capitalists on an international market. We don't have to do that. That's a choice. Okay. So on that, that's a complication. All right. And that's something.
You talk about that though.
Yeah. But I do think that if we limit what we're talking about here to what we know the government controls, I don't disagree with you. For example, we all know, I think we all saw this and didn't realize we saw it. Why do teenagers now command $15 an hour? Now, I'm going to put a little asterisk in that, because a lot of people who don't understand economics go, oh my God, they're making $15 an hour and I'm at like $4.50. And I'm like, yeah, but that $4.50 had more purchasing power than the $15 an hour does after the last 2 years. Okay. But so what we've seen is, oh, the workers are getting too powerful. I know you and I agree on this. I think the Fed completely knows it's not, what it's doing is not going to do shit about inflation.
No, it's not.
I think they've even, I think Jerome Powers even kind of said as much, like, oh yeah, we need to control we need to have higher unemployment to have a soft landing, control inflation, asterisk, subnote, something in the bottom. But we know that at absolute most, only 1% is caused by labor cost. And that is, I don't even believe that. Like, but that's the most they got. That's the most they could do at the time where those raises were the most real. But we do know what caused them. All right, MMTers are right about this. What caused them? The government finally said, "Fine, we're not paying anyone less than $15 an hour," and the government in the United States is the largest employer. Ipso facto, it has monopsony pricing power over labor. Like, and if you don't have a lot of excess workers, and we don't, or we didn't, they're trying to create it now, but I don't. I still don't know. And we'll get back to this. This is one of the contradictions of their current policy that I think they know, but I have no idea how they're going to deal with. It's on one hand, they know they need to reshore things and build up an industrial capacity within the country. And on the other hand, they want to weaken the working class and have high unemployment. And I don't know how you do both. I have no idea how you do both. Even with, like, you know, all these signals. I am not being a conspiracy theorist here, but I do think the fact that ChatGPT got developed at a certain, got pushed out at a certain time, that also corresponded with a bunch of signals to the tech companies. Hey, your debt's getting more expensive, so maybe, you know, get rid of some people. Is that going to actually save you money? No. Study after study shows it actually costs you more to get rid of these people. But but it does get rewarded in the stock market, perversely. And
Financialization.
Right. And since you know, technically, legally, you don't have any legal requirements to stakeholders, but you do to shareholders. So firing people, even if it's going to cost you money, is going to mean you meet your fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders. And by the way, since most of you are paid in stocks, it's not going to hurt you either. It's only going to hurt the viability of your long-term business. Oh, we have this technology been kind of fiddling around with for the past decade. Let's accelerate it really fast because it'll automate a whole lot of shit. I wonder why that happened. Oh no. Like, and you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to see that there's all this signaling going on. Is ChatGPT going to fix the economy? No, I'm not an idiot. But, and nor do I don't think there was a single, like, no one called like Bill Gates on the phone and said, "Hey, Bill, get ChatGPT ready. It's time." That's not how this works. But it is not a surprise to me at all that you got all these signals that, you know, this way that people have been getting out of the working class into, well, getting out of the working poor or working precarious, depending on where you're at, into like the working upper middle. Let's get rid of that.
Yep.
Like,
hey, I want to take you back to something important you said, and I don't want it to get lost as we move to another subject, because this is super important. Look, MMT does not see itself as a closed system. It does not see itself just in a nationalist form. It has very clear international implications all the way across. What it's saying is that those you can impose a tax on, payable only in your currency, within that space, you can purchase things that are for sale within your currency. That's all it says. It doesn't say that you're entitled to any import you want at whatever price you want. What it says is that whatever is available for purchase in US dollars, the country can afford, period. That's number one. Number two, I want to go back to the idea of the government setting prices. Government doesn't just buy stuff at the store. They don't just walk into Giant and buy some shrimp and some mushrooms. No, government puts out RFPs, requests for proposals, requests for quotes, requests for information. And they have a huge board of tons and tons and tons of these initiatives that companies come and bid on. Okay. The government can tell you we'll do a cost plus, we'll do just a fixed cost, we'll do all these different types of contracting. And that contracting is how the money gets into the economy. It's not that the government just prints it off and says, well, we got 50 bucks in the till. Come on out here and make me a sandwich. It doesn't work that way. What ends up happening is that the government will put out an RFP. It will say, hey, we need at least 3 quotes. That's called the Federal Acquisition Requirements Act, the FAR. And that 3 quotes you must get. They also have some rules about 8A, small disadvantaged businesses that have to be able to compete for certain stuff too. So they have 8A set-asides for that. Each of these things allows them to determine price based on the quotes that come in. And they have to pick, by law, the lowest price, unless they go out there and they say, we've got something for a sole source. And there's got to be a ridiculously good excuse for a sole source contract that says they have some unique product that can't be purchased anywhere else. There's no compete, whatever. Now, the next part of this is super important, and it goes to the international element, which I'm with you on this, except I want to help you see how MMT is with you as well. Within this space, if you look, Fadl Kaboub is my favorite of the folks when it comes to talking about this stuff. And he will talk about how monetary sovereignty is not something you just have, it's something you have to earn. And within that space, you have to have certain aspects of it. And there's like you climb the ladder to full sovereignty. Okay. If you don't have energy sovereignty and you're dependent on external energy, you're now going to be, you have an external constraint on your ability to function. So you've got to operate within that confined area, or you have to have the ability to produce it yourself or have an alternative. The other thing is that when it comes to food sovereignty, you look at places like Zimbabwe that folks constantly throw at MMTers like they think they found something. And MMT will tell you flat out, Mugabe went ahead, took the farmland away from the colonizers, gave it to the warriors. Those warriors were not skilled farmers. And to take it a step further, the colonizers also took a match and threw it behind them and set the thing on fire. So it brought down huge amounts of production. What did we talk about? Hyperinflation. We talk about shortages, right? Well, they lost their food sovereignty. So places like that don't have energy sovereignty, don't have food sovereignty, they're going to have a very tough time with monetary sovereignty. Because if you don't have that kind of sovereignty either, you also probably don't have value-added production to go with it. So you're going to be highly dependent on imports, and you are going to be the tail wagging the dog in this, or the dog's going to be wagging the tail, or whatever the saying goes. So I think it's super important to understand this is the reason why the IMF exists. The IMF comes in and preys on these poor small countries that haven't reached the kind of monetary sovereignty, the food sovereignty, energy sovereignty, value-added production sovereignty that a country really genuinely needs to be able to take full advantage of a free-floating fiat currency. It's not just having a military, although that certainly provides the U.S. with a lot of benefits, if you will. I call them ill-gotten benefits, but you get my point. I think that when you look at this, a country that has trade set up with different individuals that are mutualistic and mutually beneficial, I think that is not typically a capitalist system. That is not a system that follows capitalist rules. And so within this, I mean, we're pretty much global capitalism here, right? We're not dealing with a socialist world. We're dealing with a capitalist globe, a neoliberal era that has really, really created some of the most deformed reactions, if you will, to stimuli within this space you can imagine. More people are hurting than ever. You've got people that are literally starving. There's massive amount of food over here just going to waste, being thrown out. And there's people over here whose bellies are so bloated and they don't have any food. Why? Because of patent laws and a whole host of other things in terms of, my intellectual property, my production, my, instead of a cooperative environment. That is political. That is not monetary. That is not a monetary phenomenon. That is not an MMT phenomenon. That is where politics and power, which is where I would say Marxists layer over the economic system. This is how you understand that. And where capitalists say, hey, not my problem. I'm here to make a buck. I'm here to make money, whatever. And so the two are oil and water. They don't work together. They don't work well together. But you kind of, if you break out your lens and you put it on a spectrum, you can see where this stuff kind of glides across. You have aspects, traits of similar aspects of capitalism in China, for example, rise of the digital entrepreneur. Dr. Lin Zhang wrote this great book called The Labor of Reinvention, where she points out the digital divide and how these digital entrepreneurs are rising up in China, and millionaires and billionaires coming out of this pseudo capitalist China, state-driven capitalist China. So these are all political overlays over top of the MMT framework, because even though China may use some rules and some different heavy-handed approaches to manipulating or stabilizing its currency, it doesn't change the fact that it's still got a central bank. It still issues currency when it spends. It still does all the basic traits of MMT in China. Same thing in Japan, same thing in Australia, same thing in the UK, same thing in Canada. And so it really comes down to being able to analyze that country and analyze its situation. Does it have energy sovereignty? Does it have food sovereignty? Does it have value-added production? You look at someone like Venezuela, and they've got crude, massive crude. Well, guess what? Saudi Arabia has massive crude in spades. What do they do to a country like Venezuela? They drop the bottom out of crude, because the real story is Venezuela doesn't have refined oil. They don't sell refined fuel products. So that's the place to compete at. But they're at crude. Everybody's got crude, and they can literally bankrupt that nation because they were a single export type model, and it killed them. But these are the international implications. And when you think about, if I do business, if I'm China and I do business with the United States, if I'm selling goods and services into the US, I'm receiving US dollars. What do I do with US dollars? It's not the currency I use back home. Maybe I keep some for petroleum purchases or whatever, or maybe I keep them to facilitate transactions with the US. But otherwise, what do I do with them? So that China will then in turn buy bonds and stuff like that, because why not earn some interest on their money that's just sitting there at the Fed? They're not going to do anything with it back home. This is all about what's in it for me. What's in it for me? And if your currency, if you're not interested in saving in US dollars, then maybe you'll go out there on the Forex market and trade your currency in for a currency you want to save in. But it's really not a matter at all, by the way, of whether or not, they want to do business with us. Really, in the end, they're going to get US dollars. And if we do business with China, we're going to get yuan or renminbi or whatever. Renminbi, I can never say that word. But you get my point. You're going to get their currency. And then what are you going to do with that? Well, it's going to facilitate your transactions with China. It's the same way with Japan and so forth. That's where the reserve currency stuff kicks in. And people don't really understand it. That's more than clear, typically.
Yeah, I was about to say, your description of this is actually a point of agreement, as that Forex is really important, but it's not important for the ways that you think. It's important because it facilitates trade between current companies, or it facilitates savings, because what else you're going to do with another country's currency, because you might not need it. So earn some interest, trade that for real goods later, because what you're actually interested in, and people need to understand this, no one actually gives a shit about money.
No.
Like, everyone cares about money, but it's what money can do. Like,
Right.
And so, I mean, that's like you're like, oh, of course, it's obvious. Yeah, it's obvious until you guys talk about like balanced budgets and shit, because that's not obvious at all when you guys talk about that. Oh, people really care about money. No, like, that's not what's going on there. Like, honestly, if any government with the capacity of our government ran a balanced budget, they are shrinking their economy significantly.
Yeah.
And
well, hold on. What's happening there?
That.
Think about what they're doing with that, right? Let's look just real quickly, because we're in this debt ceiling fight, and we're always talking about reducing the national debt and all this stuff. What is the national debt? The United States, and in particular in the U.S., we can talk about other countries, but let's stay with the U.S. because it's easy. In the U.S., has a statutory law. It's a rule, basically, that you have to sell treasuries when you deficit spend. But it doesn't fund. The treasuries are not a funding operation. Okay. It's because we have a quote unquote positive interest rate that we're trying to defend. Okay. And people like a safe place to store their money. And so bonds, treasury bonds are like the safest bet in the world. Government always pays its bills until it doesn't with this debt ceiling fight. That's where some of these conversations are coming around, because the result of the U.S. not continuing to make its payments would be catastrophic. It would be a huge deal, because you would notice Social Security payments that you think you put your money into it. It's sitting there in a piggy bank. You'd think, hey, my money's there. I paid into it. No, that your FICA dollars were deleted just like your tax dollars were deleted. Treasury is the one that sends your Social Security payments out. So if they default on the debt, guess what? You're not getting your Social Security check. Government agencies, the people working, not getting their paychecks. All these different aspects of the government shut down if they don't make those payments. And it's not just that, it has a cataclysmic effect around the world where people are depending on, I know it's bastardized, it's like parasitic, but in places where military bases are around the world, those GIs and the rest of them are using their dollars, they're using their dollar diplomacy abroad, they're spending their sperm into the economy and creating new money babies all over the place. And that's literally how that money kind of matriculates through the economy. And if they're not spending, one person's spending is always another person's income. If they're not spending, those areas go belly up too. Right. So this is a really tragic and big deal, but the debt is nothing more than the sum total of every untaxed dollar in existence. And so when you look at this, you say, well, wait a minute, what's that all about? It's the treasuries they've sold. And the treasuries they've sold, what did you buy? How did you buy a treasury? How does anyone buy a treasury? How does China buy treasuries? They don't buy treasuries with Chinese yuan. They buy treasuries with their U.S. dollars. Nobody buys it. And who creates U.S. dollars? U.S. government, Article 1, Section 8 of your U.S. Constitution. Okay. So in the end, this whole debt thing is a lie. It's a big, ginormous lie. It's actually the national assets, because the currency creator created a bunch of tax credits and they're dispersed around. It's not debt like any of us know it today. So
right. This is
so
why
much of the go ahead.
No, I'm agreeing with you, but this is why, like, capitalists flirt with gold standard shit, but they never, ever, 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 ever will actually do that. Because it would be hyper deflationary to the point that it would hurt them immediately.
Absolutely. It would crush them. I try and explain to people the gold standard is, I have a pizza pie, right? In my pizza pie, I've got my 8 slices. But somebody says, hey, we're going to print more money against the pizza pie. So now we've got to cut it into 16 slices. So now your slice of pizza went from this to this. That's all the gold standard is really giving you a 1-for-1. And it was arbitrary as hell. It wasn't like some real thing. It was just, yeah, let's go ahead and make it according to this. Yeah, that'll work. That's all.
Why does gold have value anyway?
Yeah, fantasy. Pure fantasy.
I mean, that's a key point. So yes, you'll hear capitalists will flirt with the gold standard or whatever, but they'll never do it because it would be insane. And even when they did it, and one of the things I've learned, and this has been based off of MMT based monetary scholarship, they were always fudging it anyway. Like, I mean, that's the thing. It was always being fudged, and that's part of why they just dropped it. Now, if you want to go back to pure commodity money, you're insane. There's a reason why, if you like, this is not something I've gotten from MMTers, but I haven't gotten from MMT inspired scholarship. When you see actual commodity backed money, gold standard money is not actually commodity money. So people understand. Commodity money is when you're trading in an actual commodity, like we're trading in literal gold or literal oil or whatever. Problem with that is, one, if it's a commodity you need, you have to use it. That's a problem. Because it's like literally you're eating your money. And two, and in almost every area, the dependence on these kinds of monetary forms have been either because of two things. One, there's a government whose taxation, and it's a big government, say China, it's in silver or something, so that's what you got to use way downstream from you. Or two, you have social breakdown, and there really isn't anyone who can impose a state. So commodities actually, because you start trading for them for what they're actually worth, which is use values, which is a disaster. I'm not going to lie. Like, if you're in that situation, things have already gotten really bad.
It's the least of your problems at that point.
Right? Like, so these are things that you kind of have to get around. Marxist, I think one of the issues with Marxism, and I'm going to give you a chance to respond to this, and one of the reasons why Marxists and MMTers have been sometimes frenemies and sometimes outright enemies is Marxists are unclear about whether or not we just want to get rid of money entirely. And so I think that leads, and I say that, and the reason why I think that matters is it means we don't study it. Really, we don't. Right. Like, if you go look at like Marx studied money to some degree. He gets some things wrong, actually, and he accepts a lot of stuff from English political economists that wasn't factually accurate, but was commonly believed. Even Chartalists did this, like Knapp accepted barter theory. It took Ennis to get beyond that. But, and this is why, like I was going to say when we were talking about Kutub, because Kutub actually fixed a problem in MMT. Because it really kind of was a problem in neo-Chartalism, was like, how do we deal with the international currency sovereignty thing? Because it doesn't seem like everybody has it. And why? Like, let's get, okay, well, what is the basis of an economy? The basis of economy is its real production. And this is where Marxists and MMTers actually agree. We like, yeah, of course, the basis of the economy is the stuff you can make. It's not about the money. The money is a mediator. It's a way to store value. It's a way to get taxable receipts. But it ultimately, in Marxism, it's a fetish. But we don't study it, like, and that's been a problem. Conversely, as you know, my cryptic critique is a lot of the MMTers, and I'm not putting you on the spot here. I think this is there are political divisions between Marxists, of which there are way more than there are in MMT side. But I think the political division in MMTers really is, what do you think the class dynamics of this ultimately are going to be? I think you're right that in a certain sense, trying to tax this back before you do it is actually like making yourself dependent on this. And this is my theory of why social democracy failed. And I'm seriously, social democracy it's trying to wipe out capitalism while also being completely dependent on capitalist production for its understanding of where receipts happen, which puts it in an impossible position. Like
zero sum, yes.
Yeah, it's like, okay, so we want to get rid of capitalism, but we need the capitalist tax receipts to do this thing, to mandate production. Shit. And I'm being quite serious about that.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And unfortunately, in America, have someone like Bernie Sanders. You're a Bernie Sanders backer. I played with Bernie Sanders like this. For those of you listening, I made rapid movements. I didn't know how to deal with him. I thought his existence was a good thing, but I was worried. And one of the things that worried me is I was like, dude sounds like he believes 4 different economic theories simultaneously.
He has no economic theory. Yeah, that's the problem.
It's this weird populism stuff. And I'm not, the reason why I tend to be skeptical of populists is not because like things being popular is bad. It's because like there's usually not an attempt to systemically understand things, or if there is, it tends to be like, follow the money, bad people do bad stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but no, like it's more complicated than that. And yeah, you're right. Bernie Sanders was like, sometimes MMT, other times we have to tax the rich. Sometimes we're Marxists, sometimes we're not. And I'm like, I hope you don't
pick a lane, brother.
Yeah, I hope you don't actually try to rule this way. And I realized part of what it was okay, all this stuff seemed impossible for so long. we have bought into the like what Mark Fisher called capitalist realism or whatever, and we just didn't believe another word, particularly after the Soviet Union fell apart. Like there's like, okay, there's no real threat. Like we have to accept this and make it more humane. Because that, like the left of when you and I were both, what people don't know about us is, or know about you, is you and I share a trait. We were both right wingers at one point in our life. But the left at the time period when we were both right wingers was a left that was really, it really was just about making capitalism have a human face. Like that was what it wanted. And I've never thought that was possible. Like, but I did kind of believe at some point that maybe capitalism wasn't always evil. And that was my mistake. I thought, oh, national communities can probably control it and make it work for them. They can't. Like, and so I kind of view MMTers along the spectrum. Do you think that you can have the system pretty much the way it is now, but we just, stop this? Or do you think the capitalists, the moment you give people health insurance, the moment you give people, because we know you can. Like on health insurance, that's the most ridiculous one. We absolutely know you can, because that's one thing where all the other capitalist powers have conceded already.
Yep.
Like, it doesn't even make a socialist economy. Hell, it actually made Canada more industrially attractive than the United States in the aughts, because the companies didn't have to pay for insurance. Like, that's not that demand. But so you go, well, why don't we get it? And I'm like, well, because medical debt is a way to discipline the working class, and it makes a lot of people rich. Like, that's why we don't get it. Like, it's that's not even about what would be good for like productive corporations. That's literally about financial assets. That's what that is. All right. When you understand that, you should go back all the way back to the beginning. You should be much more angry with the Democrats. And that's kind of how I'm now like judging where MMTers are. How much are they done with the Democrats' bullshit?
So let's talk about that. And this, I have to jump when I'm done with this line here, but this is super important. So there is a lot of social democrats out there, people that think that, Keynes is wonderful. They think that FDR is a paragon of righteousness. There's a lot of things out there that are targets. They know that they didn't do it perfectly, so they'd like to fix the things they got wrong, but they want to basically build on those building blocks. And so, for me, that's where I started. I started from a position of, Bernie says, let's be fair. If you're looking to electoral politics, we have not had a meaningful left-wing person, sans anyone other than Bernie Sanders, ever. I mean, well, going back to Wallace, maybe. I mean, like, we're talking about a long, long time. Okay. Now, that's not to say Bernie is a Marxist, messiah. He's not somebody that we should put up there as leftist or Marxist. Bernie has basically capitulated and has become part of the machine, part of the Borg, if you will. But in reality, it's the system itself is not geared for big wins, for big changes. It's got checkpoints every step along the way to ensure it stays pretty much largely unchanged. Okay. So that said, so much of what I want to do, and I've been finding myself, because I did not support Joe Biden. I didn't vote for Trump. I went, the green route. But regardless, I chose not to support Joe Biden when, oh my God, it's the worst, most important election ever. You'll get Trump if you don't support Biden, blah, blah, blah. Well, I remember Joe Biden. I know who you are. And I didn't fall for the bait. And I haven't been disappointed that I didn't vote for him still. I mean, I'm still very glad I did not vote for him. But there are people out there that can say harm reduction. They keep pointing to harm reduction, and they keep looking at Democrats as harm reduction. And at the local level, you can certainly make a strong case as you watch the school fights and the attacks on LGBTQ and stuff. You're watching huge amounts of very, very horrible scapegoating already really ramping up in the US right now. The rise of unfettered, just pure hate is at a really at a very, very high level right now. And this is why Republicans and the MAGAs and all the other pseudo populist fascists look like, oh my God, they've got a stranglehold. But the reality is that there's only one reason why that kind of thinking even matters. And that's because if you make austerity the rule of the land, you can make it so that immigrants coming to your country are taking your lunch. They're stealing your women, they're stealing your jobs, they're stealing your weed, they're stealing whatever. They're and then these poor people are committing crimes. "Oh, no, we can't let these criminals into the country." These are all self-fulfilling prophecies, right? And then you got the Christian right trying to seize on its moment, and it's saying, "Hey, these trans people, man, oh my God, they're a cancer, we can't have that." And they know that if they micro slice this enough, quickly enough, that the left will do what the left always does, and that's, hey, we'll micro slice with it, and we'll splinter into a million factions, and we'll be feckless and useless and unable to fight back again. So this is not an accident, not at all. But to me, Marxists need to work with MMTers, and they need to find the MMTers that are willing to go down Marxist lane. And they need to find people that are willing to look at the power dynamics and really have a hard look at that and recognize that maybe our salvation lies outside of the electoral process. Maybe it looks at building parallel institutions. Maybe it looks at building real honest to God networks. Maybe it becomes about becoming ungovernable. Maybe it becomes about direct action. Maybe it becomes about something other than just casting your vote on election day and walking away and going and watching some binge flicks on Netflix. I mean, really, it comes down to participation and being part of the society. And unfortunately for Marxists, regardless of what they want or like, we do live in this shitty capitalist helltopia. And within that space, we do have money. And the capitalist class understands money inside and out. And people say, follow the money. Well, if you follow the money, it follows, you go right to MMT. You don't turn left, you don't turn right, you're right at MMT. And MMT will give you the institutional knowledge you need to fight back against that capitalist class and the lies they tell. Because where we're at right now, we don't have enough people to fill a thimble up. We don't have enough people out there that are aware of how the monetary system works. And for the Marxists that are interested in this stuff, there's not nearly enough of them. So they sit there and talk about some future state that may or may not ever come to be in our lifetimes, maybe 10 generations away. We don't have the numbers. Lenin would tell you, we don't have the numbers. There's not the numbers. We don't have the numbers. And we don't have the organizational capacity. And we don't have the ability to make change at the polls. So we've got to do something. And the way to do that, in my opinion anyway, is to educate what I call normies or people that are on the edge that are Marxist friendly or that are Marxist adjacent, that if they understood the monetary system would become radicalized overnight. And the things that Marxists talk about would become much more relevant to their lives. And all of a sudden, they'd be willing to consider looking at a different way. But you've got to help them see what's happening. Because right now, it makes all the sense in the world. If you think your government doesn't have money because you don't have any money, if you think the government has to borrow from banks because you have to borrow from banks, if you think the government has to do all these things because you have to do all these things, you're missing the plot. The government, which should be or could be we the people, it's not we the people by any stretch of the imagination. It's they, the capitalists. But we the people, if we were to be in control, the money system would function very differently. It may be the same exact processes. Maybe we eliminate the financial incentive through financialization. Maybe we find different ways of regulating credit. Maybe we do things in a more democratic fashion. Maybe we put our own stamp on it because we can't look backward to go forward. We have to understand that the material conditions of tomorrow are going to be different than the material conditions of Eugene V. Debs and so forth. We need to be able to plan and understand what tomorrow brings. And part of that is the scientific model that Marx supposedly deployed. And that would be understand how the system works. You can't defeat a system you don't understand. And you need to understand the way the monetary system works. And it may not be a matter of destroying the monetary system because you still got to function. within the global state. So if you think of it like that, you just simply learn how the system works, find ways of taking power. And this sounds so easy, right? But we need to organize outside of the establishment, outside of the electoral process. And we need to be able to develop some power. We have no power right now. We just yell and scream on cameras and in microphones, and we get nowhere. I mean, we need to teach each other. And I think that there's a little reconciliation that has to occur with the real material conditions where we are today, our relative power, our ability to affect change, and say, hey, we can't do it this way. We're not going to be able to vote our way to heaven. We have to do something different. And I think people are terrified of what that something different might be. And so they go, la, 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 not listening. And they just keep trudging through life, one foot in front of the other, like an automaton. And so with that, I think that, Varn, I appreciate you giving me this vine. My stated purpose, both in my media work on Macro and Cheese, the podcast, and the Rogue Scholar, is literally to bring the adjacent groups together, to bring Marxists into the fold, because I consider myself to be a Marxist, although I consider myself to be an MMT informed Marxist. I would call that a little different. And I would say that not all MMTers are, voting for Joe Biden and ready to sing the praises of Biden. Some of us are out here, we feel like we have no country, we have no representation, we have no meaningful way to execute our ideas or get them out there. And if we got together, collaborated, we could find power. We could find real power to affect change. And at least that's my hope. I just hope that we don't do it before, we don't wait too long.
Yeah. I'm very afraid that we have accidentally enabled a Weimar Republic, and we're about to get whatever comes after that. So that we both need to go. So I'm going to let us wrap up here. I wanted to say that also, don't think that I think it's only MMTers who are stupid fucking reformists. Because honestly, there's probably as many or more Marxists right now who have carried water for the Biden administration in ways that I personally consider betrayal, or even worse, or at least as bad. They've started carrying water for right wingers because they're frustrated and tailing the Democrats didn't work. Let's tail the other team. And that's a disaster. We've actually done that before.
Doesn't work.
It does not work. It goes real well. They usually put you in the camps, dude. But anyway, thank you so much for coming on, and we will probably be collaborating more in the future, so people have this to look forward to.
Awesome, man. Good. Right. Thanks for having me on, man. I'll talk to you later, buddy.
Bye-bye.
Yep, you too. Bye-bye.